To Elisa. Thank you for that generous introduction, Arisha. I love my job because as a campaign director, I get to work with amazing change makers inside and outside Ultraviolet, like Arisha Hatch. I also get to meet writers and thinkers I've long admired. One of them is with us today, Dr. Bella DePaulo. Bella, I'm sure I'm not the only person whose life you totally changed. My story is that I was in a 21-year relationship, 17 years married, from the ages of 19 to 40. When I got divorced, I was so lost and scared out of my mind. No one had ever modeled to me how to be on my own or even that I could be happy as a single woman, much less a single mother. In my journey to rediscover and reinvent myself outside of coupledom, I came across your work on Medium and it opened my whole world. Now, at the age of 47, I love being on my own. I love making my own decisions. I love having my own bedroom and even traveling alone. Something I've learned about myself is that I need some solitude to replenish my spirit. How often do you hear stories like mine?
Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me. And I noticed in the chat all these names coming up that I recognize. So thank you, everyone, for being here. But yes, your story is so common. Lots of people get married without really thinking much about it. Like, is this really what I want to do? It's just, that's what's expected. So they go ahead and do it. And then when the marriage ends, of course, it can be really painful and traumatic and difficult at first, but for some probably bigger number of people than anyone ever anticipated, they find that they love being single. They like their freedom. They like being the deciders. They like having their own space. And they discover that the time they spend by themselves, rather than being scary or lonely, is actually quite enriching.
Thank you. All of that resonates with me. People who are not familiar with your work or story, and by the way, I highly recommend Bella's TED Talk, may not know that you are 70 and have been single your entire life. And you felt this way since you were like 5. Do
That's right. Yes.
you
You
think
know,
more people would be single if they didn't face so much pressure to couple or marry?
oh, absolutely. Yes. So I'm 70. I always have been single and I always will be because I love it. And I do think if more people understood this, then more people would be single and would love it. And even the people who want to be coupled and enjoy being coupled would be better off because it would be a choice instead of what we have now, which is that people just kind of march into coupledom because that's the way they think they're supposed to lead their life. And if instead they thought about it, it would be much better for everyone.
I never realized how much structural and society biases existed against single people until I divorced. I was crushed at not being included in events with friends set up for couples only. And don't get me started on the couples discount rates, the tax benefits, and other perks
Right.
only
Right.
given to married people. What is singleism?
Ha, okay, so singleism is the stereotyping, stigmatizing, marginalizing of single people and the discrimination against them. And some of it is personal, like what you described, where you get ditched by your couple friends, you kind of get demoted, like now you're the kid. And I found that that can be really painful. I found that at my first job at the University of Virginia. Almost all of my colleagues were coupled. And during the week, we'd go out to lunch together. But then on the weekend, it's like that was couples time. And sometimes my coupled colleagues and friends would be standing outside my office door, making plans for the weekend with the other couples. And I could hear them, and I'm not invited. So, that's painful. But I didn't realize until I started really getting into this that the personal stuff was only part of it, that there are all these big institutional, structural ways that single people are systematically disadvantaged. So, for example, there are hundreds of federal laws in the United States that advantage people, they benefit them and protect them only if they are legally married. And that's one of the reasons why so many advocates of same-sex marriage work so hard to make that happen. Because, you get married and it's like you hit the piñata and this whole treasure trove of benefits and protections falls out. And, it's great for them. It's not so great for the rest of us. And then I also think just in everyday life, the way couples are so routinely advantaged. So take like memberships or cultural events or insurance, and you'll see things like, oh, a couples can come for $100 for both of them, and some people are charged $60. Well, I'm paying more per person, means I'm subsidizing. Should I be doing that? I have two incomes and probably pay for one place, right? And then there are ways in which single people are treated unfairly in the housing market. My colleagues and I did a systematic study of that in the healthcare system. Joan Delfator has done really important work on that in the workplace and in just about every domain of life. There is systematic disadvantaging of single people, which makes it all the more impressive that so many single people are happy and flourishing, even though they are, put upon by all these systematic disadvantages.
Hello?
Related to that, oh, good. Yeah. So related to that, according to your book, Single at Heart, a study of older people in the United States showed that the men and women who stayed single were most optimistic about the future, were most likely to have an active social life, and most
Mhm.
likely to have the help they needed and the intimacy they wanted. Black Americans, who are the targets of so much moralizing and shaming for their relatively low rates of marrying, were especially likely to be living a fulfilling life in their old age if they had never married. This feels counterintuitive to everything our society and the media tell us, not to mention social programs promoting marriage. How
Right.
did we get it so wrong?
Yeah, that's great. And what I love about this is what you said. It's exactly the opposite of what people think. And single people who are older are really craving this validation of what their lives are really like. Let me give you an example. And in December, I wrote this essay for the Huffington Post about it was about how I'm single. I've always been single, and this is what people get wrong. And I talked about what I loved about being single and the freedom. And I talked about my single life as my great good fortune. Well, I got inundated with personal emails from people thanking me for finally getting to see themselves in a way that they hadn't ever before. They used to be being caricatured as, the old and lonely, isolated people, and, being isolated or alone is the same risk to your health as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. There's so many things wrong with that. But so I think that, we've been craving validation and recognition of who we really are. And I love that it's the Black single people who are doing especially well when they get to later life because they've been so demonized, and so, put down because their rates of marriage aren't that high, and yet they know how to do single life. And I think one of the reasons is, they're more appreciative of many more people. We have this idea of families of choice, which really came out of the queer community, that they often were choosing the people who mattered to them because, especially a long time ago, they were more often getting rejected by their own families. But among Black communities too, I think they're less focused on just their spouse if they're married, and even if they're not. And of course, they care more about their friends and their family, and that is, I think, a more enriching way to live. The people who get all the acclaim and the celebration are the people who focus on the one. But people who focus on the ones, the many people that they care about, in some ways, I think, have richer lives. They're not just obsessed with or totally interrelated with just one person. They have, in a way, they have more love in their lives.
Here, here for the ones and chosen family. Yes.
Yes.
So at Ultraviolet, we also have a campaign to beat back misogyny online that includes
Mhm.
deplatforming misogynists such as the
Mhm.
so-called involuntary celibates or
Yeah. Yeah.
incels that are very upset with women for not having
Mhm.
sex with them. And honestly, I've read some of these guys' accounts on Medium and even empathize that they feel so lonely and lost in terms of not having a sense of purpose outside of a relationship. But as many commentators also rightfully point out, or commenters in the blog
Mhm.
comments, they're not entitled to a date, sex, or return feelings of affection by someone they're interested in. Do you encounter these single men and what do you say to them? What do you say to single people, women
Yeah.
included, who really want to be coupled and publicly denigrate their single status and single people?
Right. So let me take on the single men first. And I do get some really nasty emails, some trolling on social media by men. And they're not always incels, and sometimes I just don't know. But this one time, somebody wrote me a really cruel personal email. And I just recognized a lot of pain behind it. So I decided to take it seriously. And I told him as tactfully as I could muster that maybe he should consider seeing a counselor or a therapist. And, he might feel better about his life and that there's no stigma to it. Many people see therapists these days. Well, that was the wrong thing to do. He was incensed and he just um, elevated his level of cruelty and insistence. And he kept sending me one cruel email after another. So now I just ignore it. And when I get trolling on social media, sometimes I'll block the person, but sometimes I'll just leave it there so other people can see what's happening. And one other thing that I think about when this happens is that men such as incels who are so desperate to have a romantic relation, to have sex, I think it's in part a reflection of a culture that overvalues romantic relationships, overvalues sex. And it almost fetishizes them. So, of course, there are going to be people who feel like such failures when they don't get those things. Now, I don't at all say that to excuse incels. There's no excuse that no one should think they're entitled to sex from other people, whether the other people want it or not, obviously. But I do need to consider what our overvaluing of romantic relationships is costing us. And I'm not saying we shouldn't value them at all. I'm just saying that we shouldn't fetishize them and make it sound like that's the only thing that makes your life worthwhile. In terms of the other question you asked, which is, what about people who, single people who really want to be coupled and along the way put themselves down? And, I wish they wouldn't do that, because when single people um, are act like they're ashamed of being single and make that publicly obvious, it's almost like they're validating um, the stigmatizing of single people. It's almost like they're saying to other people, it's okay to derogate us, to make fun of us, because we don't like being single either. So I wish they wouldn't do that. I wish they'd model more positive um, perspectives on being single, even if they want to be married or coupled eventually. But, I understand in a way what could be behind that. And this comes from several studies in several different nations where people were asked to evaluate different kinds of single people. So single people who said they wanted to be single, they liked being single, and single people who really wanted to be coupled. And what both studies found is that the single people who were judged most harshly were the ones who wanted to be single. The people judging them said that they were less happy than the others, even though they were the ones who were happy. They said they were selfish. And most astonishingly, they expressed anger toward the single people who wanted to be single. Now, keep in mind, these are the people who are not complaining about being single. They're not whining about, I wish I would meet someone. And yet they're the ones that get put down. And I think the reason is that they are threatening a worldview that a lot of people, including a lot of single people, really value and want to be true. And that's the view that if only you find the one and commit to that person, all the pieces of your life will come together. Now you have your confidant and your sex partner and your co-parent if you have kids and your co-financial manager and all the rest. And you really will live happily ever after. So they want that to be true. And seeing these single people who love being single and are happily single, that threatens their cherished worldview. So that's why I think they put down happy single people and not the single people who are pining for a partner. The single people who wish they weren't single are validating the views of couples who decided to get coupled and like being coupled. It's like, we are superior, see?
You devote quite a bit of, by the way, thank you for all of that. I had never,
Yes,
it is a worldview, right? And it's
yes,
one
it
that,
is.
but it's so insidious because even I have,
Yeah.
I was raised
Oh,
and
yeah,
cultured to
of
want that
course.
above all else, even a college degree,
Mm-hmm.
right, and a job.
Right, right.
Um, you devote quite a bit of your book and writing to the contributions, often invisible, that single people make, such as unpaid
Right.
childcare by aunties to performing
Mm-hmm.
service and supporting political
Mm-hmm.
causes. It makes sense because, as you point out, when you aren't spending your time chasing and placating the one, and
Yeah.
instead focus on the ones, everyone in
Mhm.
your community and not just a romantic partner. It opens time for you to pursue service. But can you talk about why the votes and service of single people in particular are totally taken for granted? Like, why haven't we seen political candidates actively court single women as opposed to married soccer moms and NASCAR dads?
Right. Well, first, let me say something about the service that single people do. They volunteer more, they contribute a lot to their communities, their nations, and it's not just a matter of time. It's also a matter of values. There's research by political scientists that shows that single women, more so than married women, see their own fate as tied to the fate of other women. And the way they assess that is by asking this question. Do you think that what happens generally to women in this country will have something to do with what happens in your life? And single women are more likely to say yes to that than married women. And it matters when women see their fate as connected as women, they are more likely to vote for progressive issues and for progressive candidates. So, when going to your question of why we get all this attention to, cutesy labels like NASCAR dads and soccer moms, but nothing about single people, which I wouldn't want to be cutesy, I'd want it to be serious. In a way, it's a reflection of our broader cultural values. So who's especially likely to be celebrated and respected and valued? Well, it's married people, not single ones. And yes, by ignoring single people, politicians are acting against their own best interest. I mean, if they involved them more, if they took them more seriously, they might get more votes. And, it's not even just in politics that you see this dynamic happen, that people put down single people and it costs them. So, for example, when I was back living in Virginia, where I could afford a home, I can't here in California. Anyway, so I was looking for a house and I went to open houses because I was interested in the house that I went to the open house for. But sometimes the realtors would instead tell me about this townhouse they had. Wow, if I bought the townhouse instead of the house that I came to the open house for because I was interested in it, it would get smaller vision. So they're costing themselves money. And yet, singlism, this idea that single people just aren't as worthy, they're not as grown up, they're not, they're just not as good as those married people. It costs people who who feel that way. So another reason that 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 politicians don't target single people or cater to single people as much as they do to married people is because on average, single people do not vote at as high a rate as married people do. So we need to fix that.
I would say
But when
ultraviolet on that. Yes, we're on.
Great, thank you. But I think one of the reasons they don't is because they aren't, taken seriously by politicians. So it's like this vicious circle. So politicians are all about, oh, working families and children and couples and ignoring single people, especially single people with no kids. And because they ignore them, in part because they ignore them, single people are less likely to get in to vote. And then because single people are less likely to vote, the politicians are more likely to ignore them. So we need to break into that cycle and get it going in the other direction.
Well, thank you. And by the way, you can hit stop on the recording for the Q&A section.
Should
Kathy, I
I?
want to audience. Oh, no,